Dispatcher's voice came through static at 4:17 in the morning. Equipment failure on the line. Production halted. Crew dismissal effective immediately. I stood in the locker room of the processing plant in Beaumont, Texas, holding a phone that had just handed me 10 unexpected days of my life back. 18 days into a 28-day rotation, and now I was free. I should have called first. That's what a smarter man would have done, but I'd been gone for nearly 3 weeks, and all I could think about was Caleb's face when I walked through the door. My 8-year-old son had cried when I left for this rotation. He'd held onto my belt loop in the driveway, and his new stepmother had to physically pry his fingers loose while I stood there telling him Daddy would be back soon. So, no, I didn't call. I drove the 4.5 hours home to our house outside Tyler, Texas, with a thermos of bad gas station coffee and the sun coming up pink over the pine trees. And I thought about how his face would look when he saw my truck pull in. The driveway was empty. That was the first thing. My wife's silver Tahoe wasn't there. The morning paper was still wrapped in plastic on the front walk, and a flyer for some local roofing company was wedged in the storm door. 3 days of mail was crammed into the box at the road. I stood there for a minute with my duffel bag on my shoulder, and I had this strange feeling, like the house was looking back at me wrong. Inside, everything was clean. Too clean. My second wife, Megan, kept a tidy house, but this was something else, the kind of clean that meant nobody had been living here. The fridge had a half-empty jug of milk and 3 condiments. The trash can under the sink was empty and didn't even have a fresh liner. Caleb's cereal bowl wasn't in the drying rack. His backpack wasn't on the hook by the door. I went down the hall to his room. His bed was made, comforter pulled tight, pillow centered. Caleb didn't make his bed. Caleb left it looking like a tornado had rolled through. His Lego sets were boxed and shelved instead of spread across the carpet. His tablet, the one he begged for last Christmas and slept with under his pillow, sat on the desk plugged into its charger, screen dark. His sneakers, all 3 pairs, were lined up against the wall. My chest started doing something I didn't like. I called Megan. She answered on the 3rd ring, and I heard wind in the background and what sounded like a parking lot. "Honey," she said before I could speak. "What are you doing? Are you okay?" "I'm home. Where's Caleb?" There was a pause. Maybe 2 seconds, but I'd been a husband twice now, and I knew what 2 seconds of silence sounded like. "He's at the academy." "What academy?" "The one I told you about. The Honor Path program. Brother Wendell's Outdoor Leadership Academy." "Caleb, remember? We talked about this on the phone." We had not talked about this on the phone. I had talked to her 4 times in 18 days, and each call had been short because the rig phone cut out, and she always sounded busy. And once Caleb had gotten on for 30 seconds and told me he was fine and that he missed me. That was it. That was the entirety of our communication. I don't remember any program. "Where is he?" "Russ. He's been doing so well. They've got him doing physical training, devotionals, real boy stuff. He needed it. You know how soft he was getting on that tablet. He's 8 years old." "Where is he, Megan?" She gave me an address, a property out near Athens, Texas, about 90 minutes from our house. She told me not to come. She said I would embarrass him in front of the other boys. She said Brother Wendell ran a tight program and parents weren't supposed to interfere mid-session. I hung up while she was still talking and grabbed my keys. I'd been on rigs and crews most of my adult life. I'd worked offshore, I'd worked in refineries, I'd done 2 tours in the Army National Guard. I knew what professional environments looked like. I knew what permits and licenses and accredited programs looked like. And in the truck, with my hands tight on the wheel and the speedometer creeping up past 80, I was already running through everything I knew about my wife and her church friends. And the soft, sticky way she'd been talking about discipline ever since we got married a 1.5 years ago. She'd come into our lives when Caleb was 6. My first wife, Diana, had died from complications after a routine surgery. And for almost 2 years it had been just me and Caleb, eating frozen pizzas and watching baseball and trying to figure out how to be a family of 2. Megan had seemed like a miracle when we met. She'd taught Sunday school. She'd brought casseroles. She'd cried when Caleb hugged her for the first time. I'd thought I was lucky. The road out to Athens cuts through pasture and pine and old oil leases. I passed a Dollar General, a feed store, 2 boarded-up gas stations, and a sign for a Baptist church that had been there since 1924. The GPS set me down a county road that turned to gravel, then dirt, and then the satellite signal dropped entirely. I followed Megan's directions from memory. A green gate. A long drive. A wooden sign that said, Hon Horpath Academy, hand-painted, with a cross above the letters. The gate was open. I drove through. The compound, and that's the only word for it, sat in a clearing surrounded by woods. There was a long aluminum-sided building that looked like a converted stable, a smaller cinder block structure off to one side, a dirt yard with what I first thought was a track but turned out to be a path worn down by feet, walked in a circle over and over until the grass was gone, a flagpole, 2 pickup trucks parked near the main building, and a man in a brown work shirt with a clipboard standing at the edge of the yard, watching boys. There were boys, maybe 16 of them, ranging from what looked like 7 up to about 13. They were carrying buckets. I couldn't tell at first what was in the buckets, but they were full and the boys were struggling. They walked from a pump on the far side of the property to a row of trees about 100 yards away, dumped the buckets at the base of the trees, walked back. The sun was already mean, and it wasn't even 9 in the morning yet. I'd worked in worse heat, but I was a grown man. These were children. Some of them weren't wearing shoes. I parked beside the pickup trucks and got out. The man with the clipboard saw me right away and started walking over. I didn't see Caleb at first. I scanned the line of boys twice, my heart hammering before I spotted him at the back. He was carrying a bucket that was clearly too heavy for him, both hands gripping the handle, his shoulders pulled down by the weight. He was wearing a stained gray t-shirt I'd never seen before and basketball shorts. No shoes. His hair, which had been buzzed short for the summer, was sticking up in matted clumps. There was a strip of red sunburn across the back of his neck that looked old, days old. Maybe more. Sir, this is private property. The man with the clipboard reached me, blocking my view. He had a sunburn of his own and a thick neck and a holstered radio on his belt. You need to turn around. That's my son. Sir, parents don't visit the academy unscheduled. You need to leave and contact Brother Wendell's office to set up I went around him. I didn't push him, didn't touch him, I just walked. Caleb was about 30 yards out and he hadn't seen me yet, his head down, watching his feet. I started walking faster. Sir, the man was on his radio. We've got a parent on the property. North pasture, possible, 10 and 32. Caleb looked up. I will remember the look on his face for the rest of my life. There were maybe 2 seconds where he didn't believe what he was seeing. His mouth went open and his eyes went wide and he just stood there. Then the bucket dropped. The water splashed across the dirt and over his bare feet, and he ran. He ran the way an exhausted child runs, all knees and stumbling, and when he hit me hard, and his arms went around my waist, and I felt his whole body shaking. Daddy. His voice was wrecked. He was crying so hard he could barely get the words out. Daddy, you came. They said you weren't coming. They said you didn't want me anymore. They said Mom signed me away because I was too much. I went down to my knees in the dirt. I held the back of his head, and I felt how thin his neck was, how I could feel every bone in his back through that thin, dirty t-shirt. He weighed nothing. 3 weeks ago, I had picked him up off the porch easily, but he'd had weight to him. There was no weight here. Buddy, no. Listen to me. I came home as soon as I could. I love you. You hear me? Look at me. I pulled back and held his face. His lips were cracked, and there was a sore at the corner of his mouth. Nobody signed you away. You're my boy. You're my boy. They said if I cried, I had to dig a hole and fill it back up. They said crying was the devil. I tried not to cry, Daddy. I tried. The other boys had stopped working. They were staring at us. Some of them looked relieved, like they were watching something they wished was happening to them. One of them, a kid maybe 10 years old, with a bandage on his arm that was gray with dirt, took a step forward and said, very quietly, Mister, can you call my mom? That broke me in a way. I'm not going to be able to describe. What's your mom's name, son? What's her phone number? The man with the clipboard had reached us by then, and now there were two more men coming out of the main building. One of them was older, maybe 60, gray-haired, neat. He was wearing a button-down shirt and pressed khakis. He walked the way men walk when they've been in charge of things for a long time and don't expect to be questioned. The other man was younger, big across the shoulders, and he kept his hand resting on something at his hip. Mr. Pritchard. The older man's voice was calm and warm, the kind of voice that knows how to comfort a grieving widow at a funeral. I'm Brother Wendell Coyne. I run the Honor Path program. I'm so sorry for the confusion. Why don't we go inside, get out of his heat, and I'm taking my son home. Of course you can take Caleb home. He's not a prisoner, but we should talk first about what that means, because Caleb has been making real progress, and an interruption at this stage of the program can be very damaging for a young man. He's 8. He is, and he's been struggling, as I'm sure you know. Your wife has shared with us about his anger issues, his disrespect, he doesn't have anger issues. Brother Wendell smiled. All boys have anger issues, Mr. Pritchard. The question is whether we chow it or let it consume them. Caleb was clinging to me with a grip that was leaving fingerprints on my forearm. He hadn't said anything since the boy with the bandage spoke. He was just holding on. I want to see where he sleeps. That's not part of the visitor protocol. I'm not a visitor. I'm his father. Be that as it may, sir, you signed a parental authorization. I didn't sign anything. There was a pause. Brother Wendell's expression flickered, just for a second, and then he recovered. Your wife has full custodial signing authority during your offshore rotations. That's standard. Mrs. Pritchard signed Caleb in for a 6-week character development program. You can pick him up at the conclusion of the program, or you can withdraw him today against medical advice and against the program's recommendations. But you should understand that doing so, show me where he sleeps. The big younger man took a step forward. I shifted Caleb behind me without thinking about it. I've been hit before. I knew what hitting looked like, what the wind-up looked like, and this kid was definitely thinking about it. Brother Wendell, I said, and my voice came out flatter than I expected. I don't know what kind of operation you've got out here. I don't really care right now. I'm taking my son to a hospital. You're welcome to call the sheriff. In fact, I think you should. Because I'm calling him too, the second I get a signal. I picked Caleb up. He was light enough that it scared me. I started walking back to the truck. The younger man took another step, and Brother Wendell put a hand on his arm. Mr. Pritchard. Brother Wendell was still using that warm voice, but there was something else underneath it now. If you remove your son from this property, you will be violating a signed agreement, and we will pursue the matter. Please reconsider. I kept walking. I was 15 feet from my truck when the younger man moved past Wendell and came after me. He was fast for his size. He grabbed my elbow, hard, and tried to spin me. Caleb shrieked. I turned with the motion he was trying to make me do, and I let the momentum carry my other elbow back into his face. I felt his nose go. He dropped. The man with the clipboard was on his radio, shouting now. The other men, 3 or 4, had come out of the buildings, were spreading out across the yard. I got Caleb into the passenger seat. I got in the driver's seat. I locked the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the keys twice before I got the engine started. A pickup pulled across the gate as I came down the drive. I didn't slow down. I went off the gravel, through the grass, through a barbed wire fence that scraped a long crease down the side of my truck. I made the county road and kept going. About 6 miles down, my phone got 1 bar. I called 911. The operator was calm, professional. She kept me on the line. She told me to drive to the Henderson County Sheriff's Office in Athens. The deputies were being dispatched to the property I was describing, and that an ambulance would meet me at the station. Caleb was curled up in the passenger seat with his arms around himself. He was so quiet. I kept reaching over to touch his knee just to feel that he was there. He flinched the first 2 times. The 3rd time he grabbed my hand and held it. Daddy. Yeah, buddy. Is Mom going to be mad? I didn't know what to say to that. I am not a man who lies to his son. I don't know, buddy. I don't think it matters. At the sheriff's station, 2 deputies met us in the parking lot, and a paramedic from a Henderson County ambulance came over with a kit. They didn't try to take Caleb from me. They let me hold him while the paramedic checked his pulse, his temperature, his eyes. She was a young woman with red hair pulled back in a tight bun, and she had a way about her that made Caleb look at her instead of through her. She showed him her stethoscope. She let him hold it. She spoke softly. "Sweetheart, when's the last time you had a real meal?" Caleb thought about it for a long time. "I don't know." "Did they feed you breakfast this morning?" He shook his head. "Did they feed you dinner last night?" "We had to do extra laps because Theo dropped his Bible." The paramedic looked at me, and in her face I saw something professional crack. She turned back to Caleb. "Okay, we're going to take you to the hospital, sweetheart. Daddy's coming with you. Is that all right?" He nodded, but his hand tightened on mine. What happened over the next 8 hours, I'm only going to summarize because I've told it so many times now in depositions and on the phone with reporters that the words have started to feel hollow. Deputies arrived at Honor Path Academy that afternoon. They didn't have a warrant yet, but they had probable cause from what the paramedic documented and from what I told the sheriff, and from what the dispatcher had recorded of Caleb's voice in the background of my 911 call. By dinner time, they had located 22 boys on that property, ages 6 to 14. 11 of them were sleeping in a converted storage shed behind the main building, on bare mattresses on a concrete floor, no cooling, no heating, 2 windows nailed shut. 5 of them had infections from injuries that had not been treated. 2 had broken bones that had healed crooked. 1 had pneumonia. Brother Wendell Coyne, whose real name was Donald Maddox, and who had been operating boys programs under different names in 3 states going back to 1998, was arrested that night. The big younger man, his nephew, was arrested with a broken nose. 6 other staff members were arrested over the following 2 days. The Texas Attorney General's office got involved. The FBI got involved. It turned out Honor Path was getting paid by mothers and stepmothers who had been told they were enrolling their boys in a Christian leadership academy with full accreditation, while the boys were being used as unpaid labor on neighboring properties owned by an LLC connected to Maddox's brother-in-law. Hay baling, cattle work, land clearing. The boys were billed to the contracting properties as youth volunteers. The receipts went into Maddox's account. Megan was arrested 2 days later. She had not been working with Maddox the way some of the other women had, the ones who recruited and got referral payments. But she had signed documents she should have read, and she had paid $4,000 up front for what she thought was a 6-week boot camp. And she had ignored 2 letters from Caleb that arrived in her mailbox during the first week. She had ignored them and not told me. The deputies found those letters in a kitchen drawer. The handwriting on the envelopes was Caleb's. They had been opened and put back. I read those letters in the lobby of the Henderson County Jail while I was waiting to find out if she was going to be released on bond or held over the weekend. The first one said he missed me and he wanted to come home. The second one said he was scared and that the men were mean and that one of the older boys had told him sometimes parents never came back. He had spelled scared with 3 letters, scared, because he hadn't had time to write neatly. I sat in that lobby and I cried in a way I haven't cried since Diana died. And a deputy brought me a paper cup of water and didn't say anything, and I was grateful. Megan was not the worst person in this story. I want to make that clear because it took me a long time to understand it. She was a grown woman who made a choice that hurt my child, and she is responsible for that choice, and she is paying for it. She got 6 years, but Megan grew up in a household where her father, who was a deacon at a small church in East Texas, used to lock her in a hall closet for hours when she talked back. She was raised to believe that pain was how God made boys into men and girls into wives. When Brother Wendell told her that Honor Path could fix the parts of Caleb that were soft, she heard her own father's voice and she trusted it. That doesn't excuse her, but it explains her, and it taught me something I should have learned a long time ago, which is that you can't marry someone's potential. You marry who they actually are, and who they actually are is a person who was shaped by the people who shaped them. And if you don't pay attention to that shaping, you will hand them your child without realizing it. Caleb spent 4 nights in a hospital. He had heat injury, severe dehydration, malnutrition, 2 infected blisters, a sprained wrist that nobody had splinted, and what the pediatrician described as acute trauma response. He stopped talking on the second day. The hospital social worker, a woman named Patricia Lyons, who I will name because she changed my son's life, and I want her name to be in the world, came in every afternoon with a bag of art supplies. She didn't talk to him at first. She just sat in the chair by his bed and drew. Then one day she put a pencil down on his blanket and a piece of paper, and she went back to her own drawing, and she didn't look up. After about 10 minutes, Caleb picked up the pencil. He didn't draw what I expected. He drew a horse. He'd never drawn horses before. Patricia asked him about the horse, and he said it was a horse that ran fast, and that was the first thing he said in 3 days. We didn't go back to the house. I couldn't make myself bring him into Megan's kitchen, sleep him in his old bed, walk him past her bathrobe, still hanging on the hook. I rented a one-bedroom apartment near the elementary school, and I let Caleb have the bedroom, and I slept on a pull-out couch for the next year and a half. I quit the rig work. I took a job with a welding shop in town that paid less but let me be home for dinner every night, and I learned how to cook actual food, and I went to every parent-teacher conference, and I sat through every therapy session in the waiting room with a magazine I never read. The trial took 14 months. I testified, so did the paramedic, so did Patricia, so did 3 of the boys, with their parents in the courtroom. Donald Maddox got 35 years on the federal charges and another 20 stacked on the state charges. He'll die in prison. His nephew got 18. The other staff got between 4 and 12 years each. Caleb started drawing every day. Then he started painting. By the time he was 10, he was good. By the time he was 11, he was winning competitions. His art teacher at the middle school, a man named Mr. Pierre Ortega, told me at a parent night that Caleb had something he didn't know how to teach, that all he could do was give Caleb the tools and get out of his way. I framed every picture Caleb gave me. The apartment got cluttered with them. I bought a bigger place when he was 12 and put a wall up just for his art and called it the gallery, and he rolled his eyes at me. But he liked it, I could tell. The summer Caleb turned 13. The city of Tyler put on an awareness event for child labor and trafficking survivors. They asked if Caleb would be willing to show some work. He thought about it for 2 weeks. He asked me a lot of questions. Then he said yes, but only if it was the painting he wanted. The painting was 8 feet wide. He'd been working on it for months in the garage. When he finally let me see it, it was a field. A field with boys in it, a dozen of them, walking out toward the viewer. They were carrying buckets, but the buckets were full of something gold, and the field behind them wasn't dirt. It was breaking apart into birds, hundreds of birds, lifting up out of the ground. He called it what we carried out. The night of the show, Patricia Lyons came. The paramedic, whose name was Hannah Coleman and who had become a friend, came with her 2 kids. The deputy, who had been first on the scene, a man named Garza, who had retired the previous year, came in his old uniform. I stood in the back of the room, and I watched my son talk to strangers about his painting. And I thought about how close I came to not being there. That's the thing I want anyone listening to understand. I came home 10 days early because of an equipment failure at a plant 4 hours away. If that pump hadn't gone, if the foreman hadn't called the rotation, I would still have been on the line for 10 more days. Caleb would have been at Honor Path for 10 more days. I don't know what the next 10 days would have done to him. The pediatrician told me, off the record, that 2 of the boys they pulled out had organ damage that wasn't going to heal. One of them was a year younger than my son. What I want to say is this. If something feels wrong about a program, a school, a camp, a church, a coach, anything that's going to take your child away from you for any length of time, listen to that feeling. Ask the questions that feel rude. Demand to see where they sleep. Demand the credentials. Demand to talk to other parents whose kids have been there. If somebody tells you that asking questions means you don't trust your child, or you're being controlling, or you're undermining their growth, walk away. Real programs welcome parents. Real programs have nothing to hide. Real programs do not isolate children from their families. Anything that asks you to disconnect your child from you is not safe, no matter how clean their website is, or how warm their pastor smiles, or how convincing their literature sounds. I learned that the hard way. I almost learned it too late. Caleb is 15 now. He's tall, taller than his mother was, and he has her hands. He still has nightmares sometimes. He still won't drink water out of a bucket-shaped container. He still flinches when men with thick necks walk too close to him in stores. But he laughs. He laughs every day. He has friends. He paints. He's applying to a summer arts program next year, an actual one, and revisited the campus 3 times. And I met every staff member, and I asked every question that came into my head. And I'm going to keep doing that for the rest of his childhood, and probably the rest of his life. Because that's what showing up means. Not just coming back when the rig calls early. Showing up. Every day. Asking. Watching. Loving him out loud even when he's too old to want it. The other day, Caleb came into the kitchen while I was making spaghetti, and he leaned against the counter and he said, "Hey, Dad, thanks for that day." I didn't have to ask which day. "Of course, buddy. I mean, thanks for not believing her when she told you not to come." I put the spoon down. I looked at him. He's almost as tall as me now. He's got Diana's eyes. He's got my hairline, which I'm sorry about. He was looking at me with the kind of seriousness he gets sometimes when he's about to say something he's been carrying for a while. "I was always going to come, son. There was never a version of it where I didn't." He nodded. He picked up a piece of garlic bread off the counter and bit into it. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm thanking you." I've thought about that morning more times than I can count. The pump that broke down at the Beaumont plant. The 4.5-hour drive home. The empty driveway. The way Caleb's bed was made too neat. None of it was random, and none of it was luck, no matter how many times people have called it that. The truth is harder than luck. The truth is that small choices stack up the way river salt does, slow and quiet, until one day you turn around and the shape of your life is something you didn't plan, but you definitely built. I built parts of this. I want to own that. When I married Megan, I wanted so badly for Caleb to have a mother again, that I didn't ask the questions a grown man should ask. I didn't visit her family. I didn't sit with the way she talked about discipline, the way her voice changed when she talked about boys being soft. I didn't read between the lines. I was lonely and I was tired, and I let loneliness do my thinking for me. That's on me. A child paid the price for my shortcut, and I'm going to carry that for as long as I'm alive. But here's what I learned, and what I want my son to learn, and what I want anyone listening to take with them. Decency isn't a feeling. It's a practice. It's the work of paying attention when paying attention is inconvenient. It's asking the rude question. It's driving 90 minutes when somebody tells you not to. The men who ran on her path counted on parents being too polite, too trusting, too embarrassed to push. They counted on the rest of us being civilized. Civility is a beautiful thing in the right context, but in the wrong one, it's a leash that other people put on you, and they pull it whenever they need cover. Wisdom, the real kind, isn't about being smart. It's about knowing what your gut is telling you and respecting it enough to act. My gut told me something was wrong the second I walked into that quiet kitchen. I almost talked myself out of it. I almost called Megan back, apologized, said I'd wait until she got home. If I had, my son would have spent another 10 days in that field. The lesson isn't to be paranoid. The lesson is that your instincts are data, and dismissing them is a habit you can break. And courage, the kind that matters, isn't loud. It's not a fight in a parking lot, although sometimes it has to be. It's the smaller, quieter version, sleeping on a pull-out couch for 18 months because your boy needs the bedroom, quitting the job that pays well for the one that lets you make spaghetti on a Tuesday, sitting in the waiting room of a therapist's office every week for 2 years with a magazine you don't read. Showing up. Asking the rude question every single time for the rest of your child's life, because that's what love looks like when the lights are on. Caleb came back to himself one pencil stroke at a time. So did I.